In the name of God, hello everybody. This is session 3 of your syntax lesson. In the previous session, I talked about the universal grammar and the parameters and the similarities and differences between languages. In this session, I want to talk, as you see here, talk about the lexicon and sentence structure. Okay, so in this session I want to talk about the structure of each sentence and the definition of lexicon. The units of syntactic analysis. So in this session we briefly recapitulate the basic notions of syntactic structure that will be the starting point for our discussion. Consider, for example, the following example. Number 1, Jeeves will meet his employer at the castle. You see here, sentence 1 is a kind of grammatical English sentence because each word is in its place. For example, subject, the verb, object, and the prepositional phrase. So this is a kind of grammatical English sentence. When we look for its component parts, the constituents, if I ask you about the constituents and the words in this sentence, you say that this sentence consists of 8 words. You see here, Jeeves will meet his employer at the castle. You see here, it consists of 8 words. But as anyone familiar with traditional techniques of sentence parsing know, words are not the immediate constituent of a sentence. Rather, they are the ultimate constituent. The words of a sentence are organized hierarchically into bigger units called phrases. Okay, so the sentence first consists of phrases and then at last consists of words. So if I ask you about the phrases in this sentence, you say that Jeeves is a kind of noun phrase. Will meet his employer at the castle is a kind of verb phrase. So each sentence consists of a subject and a predicate. This is the verb phrase. So this sentence consists of two kind of main two main phrases, noun phrase and verb phrase. In the framework of generative syntax, the constituent structure of a sentence is represented in one of the following formats. If I ask you to represent the phrases in this sentence, you can use these 3 formats. First of all, tree diagram. Okay, the second, phrase structure or rewriting rule, and the third one, label bracket. Okay, see this one. Okay, this is tree diagram. You see here the sentence, Jeeves will meet his employer at the castle. You see, the sentence consists of noun phrase, the subject Jeeves, and the verb phrase. You see here, meet his employer at the castle, and we have a kind of auxiliary here, will. This is the format of tree diagram. You see here. So if I ask you to parse the sentence and to show the phrases within the sentence, you can use the tree format like this, or you can use the phrase structure or rewriting rule. Use this kind of writing. Sentence consists of NP auxiliary verb phrase. Noun phrase itself consists of determiner, noun. Verb phrase consists of verb, noun phrase, prepositional phrase, and the other part. You see here, we call it phrase structure rules or rewriting rules. So this is another format you can use. Instead of tree diagram, you can use this format. And the third one, the third format of writing the sentence is writing the bracket. You see here, this is, for example, Jeeves is a kind of noun. You see here, we have a bracket, and you see here, noun. Then noun phrase. This is auxiliary. You see the bracket. This is the VP, verb phrase. So you see here, we have 3 kind of format for writing the the constituents of each sentence by using tree diagram, by using phrase structure rules or rewriting rules, and by writing the brackets. You see here, this is these are three formats of writing the sentences. So we can use one of these three kind of formats. Again, you see here three kind of example based on the example number 1. At the castle, Jeeves will meet his employer. His employer, Jeeves, will meet at the castle, and meet his employer at the castle, Jeeves will indeed. You see here, again, you see the example number 1, Jeeves will meet his employer at the castle. And these three kind of example, these are the variations upon sentence number 1. You see here, just we change some elements places. You see here, for example, at the castle, in the first sentence, you see here is at the end of the sentence, and in this sentence we put it at the first part of the sentence. You see here, also his employer is the object of the verb, but we change the place of the object. Oh, you see here, so these are the variation upon sentence number 1. We call them paraphrases. Okay, these are the paraphrases of sentence number 1. In order to capture the similarity between the sentences in 3 and that in 1, we assume that all these sentences have the same underlying structure represented in number 2. You see here, all of these sentences, number 3, have a kind of underlying structure which is the same for all the sentences. This underlying structure and sentence is Jeeves will meet his employer at the castle. This is the underlying sentence of all of these sentences. So we call it underlying structure. Another operation, for example, that affects sentence constituent is the one that form question. When we have a question, sentence, we again change the places of the words. You see here, we have two kind of question, yes no question and constituent question. See number 4a, will Jeeves meet his employer at the castle? You see here, it's a yes no question. We change the places of Jeeves with will. Okay, we put these auxiliary at the first part of the sentence. This is a yes no question. And we can another question, constituent question, who will Jeeves meet at the castle? Again, these are the kind of paraphrases of the that sentence, which we call it underlying sentence. This is the underlying sentence. So we have many kind of variation of sentences based on just one sentence. You see here, this is the underlying sentence, the basic sentence. Jeeves will meet his employer at the castle, and these three ones and these two again is a kind of paraphrases or variation of that sentence number 1 and that example number 1. So this is the phrases inside each sentence. Words and phrases. Again, what's the relationship between phrases and words? Although words are not the immediate constituent of the sentence, they play an important role as the ultimate building blocks of the sentence. The words are like a building blocks, okay, you see, of each sentence. So words belong to different syntactic categories, as you know. For example, we have nouns, we have verbs, adjectives, adverb, preposition. You see here, we call them syntactic categories of each word. And the syntactic category to which a word belongs determine its distribution. Okay, what is the place of each word? For example, if it is a kind of noun, it has a kind of, I mean, a specific place, and if it has a kind of verb, it has a specific place. That is, in what context it can occur. The grammar of English, and indeed of any language, will have to contain the categorical information associated with lexical items, since this information plays a part in the formation of, sentences. We assume that the categorical information is also available to the native speaker of the language. All of us, as a native speaker of our native language, has this kind of categorical information about the words of our language. Okay, this is the native speaker again information. So lexical information plays a role in sentence structure because the syntactic category of a word determines, as you know, its distribution, the place of each word. Let us take an example sentence number 1 and consider syntactic representation 2a. Again, we can look at sentence number 1. You see here, or in the this tree diagram, you see here we have a kind of syntactic category. For example, gives is a kind of noun, will is a kind of auxiliary, meet is a kind of verb. You see here, his employer again is a kind of noun phrase, at is a kind of preposition, the is a kind of determiner, and castle is a kind of noun. So again, you see here this kind of information. So it is clear that some of the phrasal constituents of this sentence are more essential, they are more important to the sentence than others. For example, the PP at the castle, which specifies the place of the event, can be left out without any harm, but the NP, his employer, cannot. So in the sentence, in each sentence, some phrases are more important and we cannot omit them, and if we delete or omit this kind of phrase, our sentence is a kind of ungrammatical sentence. But some the other phrases, like prepositional phrase, are not as important as this one, so we can omit them without any problem. For example, look at these two sentences. Jeeves will meet his employer. You omit at the castle here. At the castle is a kind of prepositional phrase and is optional, so you can omit at the castle without any problem, and your sentence is a kind of grammatical sentence. But if you omit the NP, his employer, look at this, Jeeves will meet at the castle, we omit his employer, but our sentence becomes ungrammatical because this is obligatory part of the sentence. So in each sentence, some phrases are more important than other phrases, and we cannot omit them, but we can omit some phrases which is optional. You see here, for example, at the castle is a kind of adverb. This kind of prepositional phrase is an adverb, so it's additional information and optional, and we can omit this prepositional phrase without any problem. So this is the differences between phrases in each sentence. So another title in this chapter which I want to talk about is the relationship between predicate and its arguments. Okay, first, subcategorization. Look at the sentences below. Number 9a, Margaret will imitate Poirot with enthusiasm. You see here we have a kind of phrases again, verb phrase, noun phrase, prepositional phrase. You see here the second one, Bertie will abandon the race after the first lap. You see here again we have a kind of verb phrase, noun phrase, and prepositional phrase. This is the phrases inside the sentence. The last one, Miss Marple will reconstruct the crime in the kitchen. You see again we have a kind of verb phrase, noun phrase, and prepositional phrase. So in each of the sentences in 9, you see here the verb phrase contain a verb, you see, like imitate here, abandon here, reconstruct here, which we call it, I mean, the head of the VP. So each verb phrase has a verb which is the it is the head of the, I mean, the verb phrase. So the verb phrase consists of the verb imitate here, abandon here, reconstruct here, which we call them the head of the verb phrase. And again, the noun NP, it consists of a kind of noun phrase which we call them direct object. You see here, Poirot is the direct object of the verb, the race is the direct object of the abandon, and the crime is the direct object of the reconstruct. And each sentence consists of a kind of prepositional phrase with enthusiasm here, after the first lap here, and in the kitchen here. You see here, these are optional. I mean, these are a kind of, I mean, the optional phrase, so we can omit the optional phrases. We cannot omit the head or the direct object because they are obligatory for the, I mean, completing the meaning of the verb phrase. But we can omit the prepositional phrase in these three sentences because they are optional, they are a kind of additional information, and we can omit these three in the sentences without any problem. So this is, I mean, the relationship between the verb and its, I mean, argument. In the Chomskyan tradition, the notion transitive, intransitive, and etc. are encoded in distributional frames. Verbs are classified according to the type of VP in which the verb typically occurs. For example, we call this kind of verb which needs a kind of NP, I mean direct object, we call it transitive verb. You see here, for example, these kind of verbs, imitate, abandon, reconstruct, because they need a kind of direct object and NP, we call them transitive verb. You see here, we have a, I mean, different kind of verb based on the arguments they need, I mean. So this is the, I mean, again, the relationship between argument structure and thematic structure, I mean, its meaning. A verb like, for example, imitate, you see here, a verb like imitate expresses an activity that involves two participants. This verb, I mean imitate, needs two participants for completing its meaning. The first one is the active participant, I mean the person who imitates. And the passive participant, the person or thing that is imitated. So this notion of participants in an activity has been formalized on the basis of the approach commonly adopted in logic. Again, you see the example, I mean this kind of verb has two participants. The one which is, I mean, imitate, and the second one, the second participant, which, I mean, that is imitated. So it needs two kind of participant. So what is the argument structure in logic? Logicians have long been concerned with formulating representation for the semantic structure of sentences, or more correctly, prepositions. In the notation of formal logic, for example, this example is a sign, the representation number A is the representation of the, I mean, represented in the number B. You see here, Margaret imitates Poirot. As I told you, imitates, this verb needs two kind of participant. The active participant, Margaret, the person who imitates, and the second one, the passive participant, the person or thing that is imitated. So it needs two kind of argument. As, I mean, in logic, we can, as a, I mean, logician, we can rewrite this sentence like this. For example, A, M, P. A means the verb imitate, and these are two participants, M, Margaret, and P, Poirot. You see here, this is a kind of, I mean, preposition. So we can write the main parts of this sentence like this. This is the work of logician, okay? So so we can conclude that each, I mean, predicate like imitate needs 2 or 3 or 1, I mean, argument which can complete the meaning of the verb. So argument structure in natural language, not in logician, in natural language we can show the argument structure of each, I mean, verb. Every predicate or verb has its argument structure. It is specified for the number of arguments it requires. The argument, as you know, arguments are the participants minimally involved in the activity or state expressed by the predicate. The argument structure of the verb determine which elements of the sentence are obligatory. Okay, if a verb expresses an activity involving 2 arguments, there will have to be at least 2 constituents in the sentence to enable these arguments to be expressed. So each predicate needs its argument. What is what is argument? Argument is the participant involved in the activity and it's obligatory part of the sentence. For example, look at these examples. Meet, the verb meet or predicate meet, it needs 2 kind of participant, as you know. This is one NP and the second one NP, I mean the subject and the object. So we call meet the verb transitive because it needs a kind of, I mean, direct object. This is the subject, this is the object. So it needs 2 participants. If I ask you about the argument or participant of the verb meet, you see it needs 2 kind of participant. Look at the second one. For example, the verb give. This kind of verb needs 3 kind of arguments. I mean the subject NP, the direct object NP, and the indirect object NP. You see, it needs 2 kind of object. Okay, we call it ditransitive verb because it needs 2 kind of object. And the last one, look at the verb smile. It's a kind of verb which needs just 1 argument or participant, which is its subject. Okay, so we call it intransitive verb. Transitive verb, ditransitive verb, and intransitive verb. So it is based on its argument it, I mean, needs. So this is the classification of verbs based on the argument. So far we have only illustrated the argument structure of verbs. As you know, we focus just on the verb. Other lexical categories too have an argument structure. For example, look at this example. Poirot is restless. Restless is a kind of adjective, you know. So this adjective needs just one argument, Poirot. Okay, so we call it restless is a one-place predicate. Again, the noun. The noun analysis is semantically and morphologically related to the verb analyze. So look at this example. Analyze is a kind of verb. It needs 2 kind of argument, the subject and the direct object. The verb analysis, like the noun analysis, like the verb analyze, again it needs 2 kind of arguments. Okay, you see here NP, PP. So maybe the noun also is a kind of, I mean, it needs arguments like the verb. The last one, the preposition. Prepositions too can be argued to have argument structure. The preposition in, for instance, will have 2 arguments. You see here, John is in London. In, I mean, this preposition needs 2 kind of arguments, John and London. Or the preposition between needs 3 kind of arguments. Florence is between Milan and Rome. You see here, between, it needs 3 kind of arguments. Florence, Milan, and Rome. You see here, these are 3 arguments of the preposition. So we focus, until now we focus on the verbs, just on the verb, but as you see here, maybe some adjectives, nouns, and preposition needs arguments to complete, I mean, their meanings. Okay, thank you for your attention in this session. So we talk about the words, the phrases, and then we talk about the relationship between the predicate and the argument, and some subclasses of the verbs based on the arguments they need. And then at last in this part I talked about the other parts of the speech beside verbs, as adjectives, nouns, and preposition, which needs some arguments to complete their meaning. Okay, thank you for your attention, and that's enough for this session, and goodbye everybody.